Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Hughes. I'm with Maersk, also known as AP Moller-Maersk. We were founded in 1904, and we are the integrator of global logistics. I am excited to be with my esteemed panelists today and on this huge topic of logistics and transportation. We could probably sit here for hours talking on end. But today we'll just talk on a few important things that are related and also spoken about earlier yesterday in the conference and then throughout the day. I know everybody probably listened to Gene Soroka. He's always very thorough in the information he provides. And so we'll just take it away, and I'll start with Chris, who's the Deputy Director of the Port of Los Angeles. Chris, introduce yourself and let us know what you enjoy most about your position.
Well, good day, everybody. Happy to be here. Chris Chase, worked for the Port of Los Angeles, been here about 21 years doing that, and before that, I was with a shipping line, so that's kind of my background in all this. I think one of the most interesting things about what we do, at least in the port side, is no 2 days look the same, and that's what really appeals to me about working there, is I'm not doing the same thing day after day. One day, looking at people here, working with Matt on trucks. I can work with Craig on terminal operations, or our new favorite thing for Craig and I is cruise ships. So, besides the logistics that we're talking about, we also deal with cruise ships, which are kind of fun. So I think that's really the heart and soul of what makes the port jobs interesting, is that you just don't do one thing, or at least in the business side of our port, we don't do one thing. While we're container dominant, we do have many lines of business. And there's so many components of the container business, which is what we get involved in, the trucks, the trains, the shipping lines, the cargo owners, which take up, a big portion of what we do. So that's kind of the fun piece of it. And that's really why I like and have been stuck around at the port, is because of all those kind of unique and interesting things we get to do, not being the same every day. Matt, I'll give it to you.
Matt Schrap, I'm Harbor Trucking.
Hello, thank you. My name is Matt Schrap. I'm CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association. And probably my favorite thing is all the free swag that I get when I get to go to these cool events and free lunches and breakfast.
You're not busting open those containers, are you, Matt?
No, that's not me. That's not me. That's the rail problem. So for me, honestly, it's the people are the most interesting part, whether it's port authorities, terminal operators, our fellow trucking company members, government officials, I hate to say it. But I think for me, it's the people, because the people are what make this industry move at the end of the day. And a lot of times, folks really don't understand how the supply chain works. But that's probably the most fascinating thing that I've learned, is how fragile the supply chain is. And I think it was truly exposed during the pandemic and the subsequent cargo surge that we saw that one little chink in the chain reverberates throughout the entire globe. And getting to interact with individuals about coming up with solutions to enhance productivity or throughput and velocity, that's been the most exciting thing for me. And then having the opportunity to meet new people, get to speak to folks like you to talk about our issues, I think that that's probably, for me, the most interesting component of my job.
I guess it's still good morning. Good morning. Craig Mygatt, CEO of Ceres. We're part of the Macquarie Group. So we're basically a private equity firm that has actually the most terminal space within North America. So Macquarie is an Australian bank, and they have ownership of 3 terminals here in LA, up in Washington. They're a MAR terminal in New York, and at Ceres, we're a service provider, and we have assets such as Jacksonville. We have a terminal there, and we work in 20 different ports as Ceres. And before that, 31 years with Maersk, and ran the intermodal, all the operations, inland operations for Maersk for a few years, and then I was CEO of Sealand before that. And what I like about, the job is fantastic right now, because as I'm really on the service side for Maersk, with Ceres, it's all about investing in the infrastructure and putting money into projects and seeing what happens as those projects come to life, and how much more throughput, how much more productivity you can get by making investments. And it takes time to get a project from ground all the way up to running. It takes a long time. To see that actually come to life is really exciting, and that's really what gets me up every day.
Abs Kapur, Next Trucking.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So as Stephanie introduced, I'm with Next Trucking. Joined Next as the chief exec early this year. Prior to that, spent more than a decade in the world of investing as an operating partner with KKR. And then, like many of us on this panel, I guess nobody gets away from Maersk. I did start my career more than 2 decades ago with Maersk, and this is kind of, in some ways, coming full circle, because I remember the first time I was in LA Long Beach, and as you can probably see from my accent, I'm not local to here, was actually with AP Moller-Maersk terminals, visiting Pier 400 in the early year 2000. And in some ways, not necessarily always by design, but my career has kind of rotated in and around ports, trucks, shipping, container logistics more broadly. Next Trucking, we're really a little bit of a hybrid between being deeply ingrained into the logistics value chain, into the operations of container logistics, but also very much in equal parts being a technology business. And we describe ourselves as sort of that left brain, right brain combination between having people in our business who understand, hopefully have the credibility, have a lot of relationships with the people in the industry, but also bring a lot of people who come from outside the industry and have, if I can say, a healthy level of disrespect for status quo in the industry, and hopefully sort of that mutual understanding, respect for partners as well as people coming from outside. And really what we are trying to do is focus on drayage, and I can talk more about that, which is kind of the entry point. So if you think of supply chain logistics as the lifeblood of the economy, and if you look at ports and terminals very much as the key entry points, what we are focused on is that first mile, really helping unblock or unchoke those first points of entry and make those seamless. And really the way we are doing that is building strong collaboration, strong partnerships with many participants, because it is a complex problem, as most of us know. And I think the only way to solve that is to bring people together, align interests, put technology to bear where it's relevant. And that's what really I find quite fascinating, which is a very interesting problem to solve. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great. How many of you have downloaded the Wahova app on your phone? Great. Okay. We're going to run our first fact or fiction question. And for those of you who don't have the app, I'll let you know the fact or fiction question is, it takes 2 years to deliver a wharf crane to a West Coast terminal. Fact or fiction? For those of you that don't have the app, raise your hand if you think it's fact. Or for those of you that think it's fiction, raise your hand. Anyone? We'll check. Everyone must have the app, so we'll. Abe, how's it looking? Can we see the totals or? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right, so the answer is, it's a fact that it takes 2 years to deliver a wharf crane to a West Coast terminal. And those wharf cranes, as I'm sure my illustrious panel can agree, they move about 28 picks, that's 28 containers per hour, depending on how many men you have working on it. That's just one gang, one man working at a time. So if you have 4 gangs, then you would multiply that by 4.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that a little bit, it's from project to getting it up and running. So you go to a decision base, you come together with an investment opportunity, and you go to manufacturers and you say, okay, we need 4 ship-to-shore cranes. It takes you from time to start up all the way to the end. It'll take you 2 years to get those cranes commissioned, ready to go. So when you think about, oh, you can just snap your fingers and fix a problem by having assets put in place in the ports, you really, it's a lot of private money in Savannah. They do have the state, and South Carolina, the state invest, and Virginia, the state invest. But for the most part, it's private money out here, and it takes a long time to get that up and running. And then there's, of course, all the regulatory and EPA and all that on top of it.
I think the cool thing about them is, since they've had these cranes for 50 years, and they've been running on electricity since day one, which is kind of cool that people don't realize that in all the discussions we have about diesel emissions, everything else, most of our big equipment's running on electric for a long time, the biggest. And then Craig didn't mention, but $15, $18 million a pop for those cranes. And to give you an idea, we have between LA and Long Beach, there's about 170 of those cranes currently working. So it's a pretty big investment on those the bottom line dollars right there.
And then as you invest in these, you can push more ships through the port. And you also have to invest on the terminal side, the yard side, so that you can expand the capability of the port and that could support the cranes. So there's a lot that goes to it, and it takes time to expand. I know in Yangshan, or if you're over in some of the Asia ports, it's obviously quicker because a lot of manufacturing is going on over there, and they have more capability to create land, let's say, than here.
And I'm glad we put that photo up there because I think I'm the only one on this panel that didn't work for a steamship line at one point in time. So
We won't
I'm
hold you up
truly
against you,
independent.
Matt.
That's right, yes.
Yeah,
Your career isn't over yet.
I will live and die in the trucking industry. For, like as Abs had mentioned, right, the trucks, it's first, it's last mile, it's everything in between. We look around, everything was brought by a truck. And my question was going to be is like, first, does everyone know what a wharf crane is in the first place? So I'm glad that, we have this photo up there. What's interesting is as the ships get bigger and bigger, I mean, you guys would know how many TEU ship that is right there. What is that, 15,000, 20,000 TEU ship? And the largest ships right nowadays are like 26,000 TEU, which they don't even fit in the Panama Canal anymore. So you've had these cranes that have been around since day one. Some of them have to be lifted so that they can accommodate the larger vessels that are coming in. Ports have to do more dredging to compensate for these vessels. So it's just fascinating how far the container shipping industry has come since 1956 when Malcolm McLean, who was a trucker, by the way, who
Yes.
invented the container. So blame the
Right.
trucking industry for all these issues that we have. All those are probably all empty containers at a particular terminal somewhere in LA Long Beach. But fascinating. So that's great. It's amazing the cost scale of some of this stuff. So glad we all now know what a wharf crane is at least.
And since you're speaking now, Matt, what are your main challenges today?
Oh, wow. That could be how much time do we have? I heard earlier that Gene, my friend and colleague, was asked about the infamous AB5, Assembly Bill 5, which is something that has really upended the trucking industry as we know it. While it hasn't been enforced yet, and it hasn't been enforced over the past 2.5 years since the bill was passed in 2019, subsequently went into effect in 2020, the California Trucking Association challenged the bill and went all the way to the Supreme Court. And on June 30th, the Supreme Court denied the petition for writ in order to hear the case. So once that happened, it went back to the Ninth Circuit, where more or less the 3-judge panel on the Ninth Circuit, there was one judge who said the case was based on federal preemption, right? Which means federal law, obviously you guys are smart, is going to trump state law anytime it has to do with the routes, rates, and services of motor carriers engaged in interstate commerce. But this court isn't a preemption kind of court. And they've actually denied every single preemption hearing that has come before them so far. So what happened was as they denied that, went back to the Ninth Circuit, which effectively said that the law is upheld. You had one dissenting judge in the 3-judge panel on the Ninth Circuit who said basically he would have to be blind to not see how this AB5 was going to impact the routes, rates, and services of motor carriers, because it effectively is eliminating the ability of single truck owner operators to lease on with an overlying motor carrier, which is how business has been done for the past 43 years since 1980, which really makes me feel old at this point in time, that now we've upended this industry. It's very difficult to be able to comply without some fear of some legal action from the state of California or from, as they're affectionately referred to as, the container chasing attorneys out there who go after trucking companies for misclassification suits. So that's probably our largest issue. Our organization, we have non-asset-based owner-operator fleets. We have asset-based employee fleets. We even have Teamsters fleets. In fact, we have the largest Teamster employer in the world, UPS. We don't discriminate as far as business model is concerned. But the problem is that there's so much ambiguity in the law that you can't even have 2 large asset-based employee fleets contract with each other anymore, which was typical practice over the years, especially during capacity swings when you need to supplement your existing fleet by contracting with another company. You can't do that anymore. So that's probably pretty high on our list right now. And then, of course, everybody's favorite four-letter word in California, CARB. Perhaps you're familiar with that too, the Air Resources Board. Those are some of our other issues. So again, I could talk for a long time on this stuff. So I'll stop right now.
That was actually one of our next poll questions.
Ooh.
Our next poll question is the AB5 rule only covering trucks?
Fact or fiction?
Fact or fiction?
Cue the Jeopardy
Yeah.
song.
Sorry, I can't.
Okay.
Man, if we did unionize.
So start voting.
As Teamsters throughout, would that qualify?
Well,
That's correct. We have a very smart audience. It's fiction. Everyone here got it right. Thank you for participating.
any independent contractor, unless you're one of the over 100 exemptions that got put into the bill by AB 2755. The irony of AB 5 is that they say it's a law of general applicability, which is a lot of the reasoning why it's moved so far through the legal process, but there's over 100 exemptions that exist. And I can tell you, I don't know if you guys know who Willie Brown is. He was a former Speaker of the Assembly, very powerful man in Sacramento before term limits were imposed. He was a freelance journalist for the Examiner up in San Francisco. And all of a sudden he got a note saying, you've reached your 35 article limit submission max as an employee, so you can't write any more articles. And of course, Willie was up in arms about this. And lo and behold, a bill got introduced very soon after that that basically put in exemptions for freelance journalists, chiropractors, things of this nature. I would always say that AB 5 was always targeted at the trucking industry. Rideshare was merely a distraction. Nobody thought that Uber, Lyft, DoorDash were going to sit idly by. And in fact, they didn't. They spent $280 million to have Prop 22 put on the ballot. While it was found unconstitutional, it's been appealed. Well, it's not being enforced now, so we'll see. But those very deep-pocketed industries were not going to sit by and allow this to happen. And lo and behold, the real impact, besides some community theater groups and some other freelance musicians, the trucking industry is really feeling this the most at this point in time. And Craig asks, hey, if you're a Teamster, do you get out of it? More or less, if you're an employee, then you're out. If you're an employer trucking fleet, then you don't have to worry about this ABC test. The B prong of the ABC test says basically you cannot be in the same industry as the hiring entity that you're contracting with. And so in trucking, that's where it basically creates the issue. So you could be a Teamster, but the problem is, and what we've said throughout the process of the AB5 development, as well as throughout the appeal and currently, that there are thousands of employee driving jobs available today, right now, and for years, even as Teamsters. The fact of the matter is that these small, independent, entrepreneurial individuals do not want to be employees. Some of them net $5,000 or gross $5,000 a week doing this job. And you can't come to somebody who's making that kind of money and say, you're going to be an employee, make $35 an hour, but you get a 401k. It doesn't make sense.
Abs, what is your opinion of it, and how has it affected you as far as the legislation and how it affects brokers?
Yeah, look, obviously, I think Matt covered a lot of the base here. We, as a platform, as a marketplace, and maybe just to backtrack a little bit, we have truck drivers, carriers on our platform that fit in variety of carriers, a variety of categories. So we actually employ drivers on our payroll for a very small percentage of our capacity. We then absolutely love to partner, and I think that's really the lifeblood of what we do, is bring a lot of owner-operators, because that is really what we are driving here for in a big way, is we feel that in a lot of value that gets created, to Matt's point, is getting created by many of the truck drivers, the owner-operators, et cetera, and they probably don't get a fair shake of the value that they help create in the broader ecosystem. So we very much partner with owner-operators. But we also then partner with a lot of small and medium-sized fleet operators in the market. And in some ways, you could argue we are providing and other marketplaces are providing a little bit of that solution set where owner-operators that may be getting negatively impacted, unfairly negatively impacted perhaps by this regulation, have avenues to continue to be owner-operators, which is what they want to do. And I think many people have probably read about strike actions and other actions that have been taken, which is ironic because the regulation is supposed to protect the same individuals who are actually up in arms protesting against that regulation. So coming back to how we see it, we absolutely see the impact of what that's creating for some of our big stakeholders. And what we are looking to build through the marketplace and the open ecosystem, which I would want to go deeper into, is really providing avenues for people to play the role they want to play on terms they want to play that role. And that's what we are looking to enable from a marketplace concept towards the owner-operators.
Everyone hears about the trucking shortage. I think it's a huge number, 68,000 plus, over 4% loss in drivers. And what do you guys do to attract good drivers? And also the Clean Air Act requiring trucks to be new.
I can take the first part of it, and I'll invite my colleagues here to go into the second part as well. But what doesn't meet the eye on the surface when people say there's a huge shortage of truck drivers, and I haven't seen any place where if you've got such a big shortage of truck drivers, this is a fact, which is 40% of the time a truck driver is spending is wasted either in admin or waiting in lines or doing things where they are not hauling a load. So if it is indeed such a precious resource, then why is it being wasted? And I think to your question, what is one of the biggest challenge we face, and I think the industry faces, is really balancing and matching the right demand to the right supply at the right point of time. And that's where I feel the biggest value to be created is, and that's where there's a lot of benefit we can bring both to the experience, not just of the truck drivers, but also return on investment for port operators, terminal operators, union workforce, steamship lines, etc. It's really going after what I would call waste in the lean language, which exists in the industry, rather than sort of getting carried away by saying there's a huge shortage of truck drivers or there's a huge shortage of another form of asset when we are actually wasting away a lot of that asset in the market.
And I think that's where the technology piece comes into play, right? With the platform that you have and offer.
That's correct. That's correct.
So the driver shortage is really felt over the road. Locally, there's not really a driver shortage. There's not. These guys are home every night. They make a darn good wage. And while some of them, especially the independent contractors, you got to work. I mean, I don't know what this notion of getting paid to not work, it just doesn't, that's not how it works. The more loads you haul, the more you're going to make. To Ab's point about, and this is no reflection on terminal operators necessarily, but your average turn time in LA Long Beach is about 90 minutes. A turn time is the time it takes you to sit in line to get into the terminal, to do your business behind the gate, and to get out. 90 minutes on average. 25% of all of those turns are over 3 hours for the total amounts of turns that are done. Now, that's not an efficient use of time. Most motor carriers pay these drivers for waiting time, but they're drivers. Drivers want to drive. They don't want to sit around. I'm sure how you guys all feel when you get trapped in traffic, right? It's very frustrating. Just imagine being there. You can't get out of your truck in the terminal. You need to sit in there and wait for a crane to come service you. We've tried to put in appointment systems to better meter out when the containers are available, when people are showing up. It's chaos, to say the least. So where we think about how we train drivers and recruit them, it's really about this driver experience. And we have gates that work at night, right? But you don't have a lot of drivers who want to go at night at midnight because the service is spotty and you'd rather be at home with your family. But either way, we moved 20 million containers last year in LA Long Beach. I would say probably 70%, give or take, was by truck. So the goods are moving. It may not be done in the most effective, efficient way, but they're moving. Could we get more efficient? Unfortunately, we're going to have to because of the Clean Air rules, which is basically the Clean Air Act gives the ARB authority to pass in-use standards on trucks that are engaged in service. No other state has this authority necessarily. So because they pass state implementation plans that have strategies like drayage standards or in-use truck and bus standards, that operators have to meet these rules. At the end of this year, we will see about 23% of the total capacity removed from the marketplace in drayage, both LA Long Beach and Oakland, overnight because of a legacy rule that's been on the books for 15, 16 years. So we're going to have to get more efficient because we're losing a quarter of the workforce. And that is just through sheer attrition because of air quality laws. So efficiency is key.
Chris, how about you? How are you attracting new employment at the terminals and at the port?
Well, for the port itself, it's not really that much of an issue. We're a government agency, so we don't pay a ton per se, but people stay for a long time. So not really an issue at the port itself. In terms of waterfront labor, generally speaking, they're pretty well paid jobs. Most people kind of gets underneath their skin. They stick around. We don't see a lot of people leaving the industry. I think it's harder when you work for supply chain or ocean supply chain, in particular folks who don't live near the water. I think if you notice on the coastal jobs, not much of an issue. It's probably a bigger challenge inland from what we understand. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good point by Matt on the terminal side, and it is a very complicated operation when you get into the terminals. There's an appointment system, and we have labor issues. Even though they're well-paid jobs, Chris, we had 118 gangs last week in the LA basin that didn't show, which there's about 16 people or 17 people on each gang. So a gang is a crane operator, all the yard hustlers that run behind it, usually seven drivers, you have spotters, you have people that work the containers off the ship. So 118 gangs last week cut, and then you have a high demand of truckers coming in to pick up import loads. You have ships discharging into piles that you don't have any room, so you're putting boxes wherever you can put them on the terminal. It's somewhat laid out pretty well, but at times you're putting them where you can at 1 o'clock in the morning when you're working a ship. You do what you can do. So it's a great point. I mean, it has to be much more efficient than it is today on the terminal side. There are limiting factors, and we need to cover. One of the discussions with the LW right now is how do we get more labor into the market so that we can fill these gangs out. And it's not like it's not holiday time. It's August. There should be gangs. It was January. There should be gangs. No matter what month it is, we're getting shorted every week. So it's a chronic issue that should not be an issue. These guys are very well paid, and girls.
What do you
very well
think's
paid.
causing that?
Well, you can get into it. Yeah, we can brush over that. I mean, there's a lot of discussions around how to bring more people on board, but it's better to have a limited number of people on the wage side.
Chris, what do you deal with? How do you deal with the bottlenecks?
Well, as a port, we're not an operator, so these are the operating guys. But from our level, because we're where things intersect, is where we see that. And someone put it best during about a year ago from the National Retail Federation. Said there's bottlenecks from the factory floor to either your front door or if you are going to a store, and that is the challenge. And a lot of it intersects at the port, and I think that's where we see it. And it's exactly what we've just been talking about. It's the connection between a trucker who wants to pick it up at a certain time and the availability of that container at a certain time, and do they intersect? The other tough thing about a port usually is it's a change of ownership in many cases of that container. While shipping line like Maersk is carrying it, behind the scenes, the owner of that cargo, when it gets off that ship or it gets picked up, it is then given to the accounts of the person picking it up. So if you're a big retailer, your supplier delivers it to you and somewhere along that chain, and that handoff of that often creates just a lot of issues, and it just tends to bottleneck. And I think the other thing is, like we've all been talking about, and it was mentioned earlier, is that most of what we do is based on a certain speed or a velocity, and that velocity is not even close to being met. Basically the last 2.5 years, we've doubled the time it takes to do everything. And everything was designed, it was working pretty well for about a decade in terms of just a constant flow, and now it's taking twice as long. And then, of course, it just snowballs from there. As you said, any one piece of this chain is disrupted, then you've got issues that go throughout the chain. And I think that's the other tough part of it. And of course, last 2 years plus have been also something that we've never dealt with before on top of it, which is not helping the situation. And you never know, you wake up in the morning and discover that your factory has now been closed and you don't know when it's going to reopen. So you have to go scramble to find something new. And then, we're kind of talking about it. For us, our biggest bottleneck, was the ships. Well, I mean, in some respects, ships are floating warehouses. So the beauty of it is you can stick them somewhere in the ocean and they can wait. Not what you want to do. Ships are supposed to make money by moving. It's kind of like trucks are supposed to make money by moving. And that's not happening. It's not there, but there is that option. But of course, that's why we had 100+ ships sitting offshore at one point, is because that was the only way that you could continue to move cargo and keep, for example, overseas fluid, is by getting that stuff out of there. So it's the number of bottlenecks has just been staggering. It's just, it's whack-a-mole. You solve one and it goes somewhere else. And you're seeing it today. We're, 9 or 10 ships right now in our queue, but Savannah's got 40, Norfolk's got 20 or something like that.
Yeah, so yeah, Houston has 25 ships sitting
That's right.
outside. New York's got, the whole problem is shifted over to the East Coast. And when we say we get shorted gangs here, it's not just here. It's all across the country. It's in Canada, in Vancouver, Montreal. It's an issue labor-wise to keep things moving, but also capacity within the terminals to handle it. So it takes a lot of money to invest into these.
It's a global issue. We have ports around the world that
Yeah,
have vessels
right.
just standing, and we've lost about 20% of our vessel space that we could offer to customers just because of the slips in the vessel reliability and the scheduling.
And the ship cost per day right now is extraordinary in the charter market. So Maersk charters 50% of their fleet. It's $100,000 a day sitting, just a charter rate. Then you have fuel on top of it and everything, which is much higher. So it's costly for the shipping lines to have a ship sitting for any period of time, much less 2 to 3 weeks.
And what's interesting too, because all of us remember all the images of the ships off the coast here, right? When you talk about 20 ships outside of Houston or however many in these other ports, that's like having hundreds of ships. If you equate the two, the size of LA and Long Beach compared to the other ones, it is chaos of what's happening back there as well. But what's interesting is now we have a queuing system here. So you'll never see the amount, all those ships at anchor, out of sight, out of mind. They're all hiding behind Catalina Island, right? So, I think there's something like
clever.
58 or something that are, within their point of origin to 150 nautical miles to 40, then within 40. So we'll never see that again. But the vessels are still coming, but there has been so much diversion. But like I said, if you want that West Coast cargo, you're going to get those West Coast problems. And so now everybody else is feeling the pinch of what we've been experiencing here for, since ever, frankly. So now, what's also interesting is that all those ships, many of those ships were smaller ships, less than 10,000 TEU ships. Many of them were first-time entrants into the Trans-Pacific trade. They were ships that were sailing over here from Asia that didn't even have a reservation space in a terminal. They just showed up here and were like, well, can you service us? Meanwhile, there's the normal trade lanes that are happening, the normal strings that are happening from Asia to the West Coast. And they just figured that they could just sail on over. So you had ships that were stuck out there for over 40 days. And you can imagine how that would be for the crew of those ships. It's very taxing because your quarters are only so big. So it's fascinating how much you learn in what's happening here. We were all flying under the radar for so long until the supply chain crisis happened. Now it's, open kimono across the industry, unfortunately.
Great. Let's take another poll. The next question, or statement rather, is the Clean Truck Act allows trucks of 2010 and newer to be on the road. Is that a fact or fiction?
There's some nuances there.
Yes. And Matt, you already gave the answer. And the answer is fact, and most of the room got it right. Way to go, guys. Awesome.
With one caveat.
Of course.
We are looking at this standard, 2010 engine standard, right? A lot of times people can get confused when you hear, truck versus engine. Just like when you go and buy a car today, if you go buy a brand new car today, you're buying 2023 model year cars in 2022. It's the same thing with trucks. And so when you have a truck year of 2010, it's actually an engine year of 2009. And right now at the end of this year, any 2009 or earlier engine, as of December 31st, 2022, will no longer be able to legally be operated in California unless it's under some type of exemption. That's that 23% that I was talking about that'll be removed from the supply chain overnight, literally, in California. I mean, we're the largest port gateway in the country, and you're telling me that 23% of the truck power is going to leave the marketplace?
What's the
Again.
absolute number for that?
That is around, in LA, Long Beach, that's around 4,200 trucks that are servicing regularly. That's like one time a day, 5 times a week. In Oakland, it's about 1,600, give or take, maybe 1,500 at this point in time. You do have some churn. There are older vehicles being put out. And in fact, you have more vehicles in the drayage truck registry today than you have ever. We have over 21,000 trucks registered to do business. 16,000 of them are what we would call frequent, regular callers, active or in service. So it can be significant.
And there's 60,000 containers right now waiting to get railed out. So if you say, oh, well, I'll just rail out because I don't have the truck power,
Right.
you don't have that option. This is the worst
Yeah.
I've ever seen it within
Yeah.
30 years.
The
It's
dwell
crazy.
right now on the rail,
It's
on dock
terrible.
rail is averaging 13 to 17 days, depending on the terminal.
Yep.
It-
So
it
the
should only
diversion
be
of
like
cargo
4.
was, people say, because of COVID in Shanghai and also because of the ILW negotiations. The rail is a limit. You can't get to Chicago. It's going to take too long. So you take it around to New York, or you take it to an East Coast port, and you transload or you distribute from East Coast warehouses. So it's going to be an issue on the East Coast for a while, and the Gulf, until the rail lines.
With
You
all
guys
the
wondering where
laws,
your stuff is.
Yeah.
with all the laws originating in California, what can one do if they want to start a small trucking company and abide by the laws? What advantages do they have, or government subsidies or state subsidies that they would have with a clean truck?
I think Matt's probably a lot better equipped to answer that. The point I would add is clearly the odds are stacked against you if you're a small player in this market today. I think we all know it's scale economies that win. We talked about shipping costs, slot costs. The largest shipping lines procure those at much lower slot costs. Matt mentioned a lot new capacity came in the Trans-Pacific trade at the peak of the charter market rate. Obviously, that has brought more capacity, but they're not nearly as competitive as rates start to come down. The point that I would want to emphasize, and I don't think there's enough happening, not just in the trucking world, but more broadly in the supply chain world, is, and if I can draw the analogy with, say, an Apple versus Google in being a closed loop with an open loop system. And there are players like Maersk, maybe some of your other larger competitors who have the wherewithal, who have the ambition, the balance sheet to be able to invest into building that closed loop system, owning assets up and down through the value chain, whether it's ports, whether it's shipping asset tonnage, whether it's landside infrastructure, what have you. And that's great. Similar to an Apple mindset there, which is I control every single piece of asset base there is up and down through the value chain, and hence I can provide a differentiated solution to my customers and to the marketplace. Nothing wrong with that. Clearly, there's room to do that. I believe there's not enough of the open loop that's happening in this industry. If I then draw the analogy to Google, for example, which is there's asset owners, including some small operators, new entrants, that either want to put their resources, their time, their assets onto that ecosystem, but nobody joins that ecosystem together to be able to provide a open loop solution, which I believe is more resilient. There's fewer sort of single points of failure in that open loop system. But what that does require is much greater or much closer dialogue with regards to aligning the interests, creating an open dialogue, and sort of being more open, to Matt's point, in bringing different viewpoints. But I do think once, and that's one of the big things that motivates us, is how do we create that ecosystem? How do we bring those partners together? How do we align both commercial and other incentives to bear? Bring regulators into that conversation, because we do need the right sort of regulatory framework for that to happen. But I think once we build that ecosystem out, that is a much more resilient and probably the only scale way to solve the problem for the industry at large, and then doing that alongside some very large players like Maersk and others who obviously will also contribute to the solution set.
Right,
What
so
do
was
you
it a
think of
data
the,
lake? Or?
Blockchain solutions like Trade Lens?
That's exactly what I was going to say. We
Yeah.
have Trade Lens, which is a data lake, and all the global freight forwarders and ocean carriers are on it, with the exception of one carrier.
Yeah. No, I think those are part of the solution.
Mhm.
I think where there's a little bit of lack today is there is a fair amount of money, investor, venture, and late stage investments that have come in, probably chasing purely the technology side. And technology and data do have a role to play.
Mhm.
And I don't say this in a negative way. The industry is quite traditional. I mean, take the basic example. People, even in our teams, are designing some avant-garde, breaking edge technology, and they're saying that's the new way of designing apps. And it doesn't really matter if the user who you're there to support and ease their day job, if that's not the way they are used to consuming that technology, there's no point designing technology, because that's the furthest along that technology has gone. We need to bring that technology to what makes sense and make it practical. And I think we need to not just design technology solutions in isolation, but really embed them into the operating model. And it needs to be both a process and an operating model change, as well as sort of the right technology investments and data investments, whether that's blockchain, Trade Lens, or others. And really bringing those two together is in my mind, sort of really how we.
Can you use an example for the students in the audience?
Yeah, so let's take a very basic example. A truck driver who wants to go and pick up a container at a particular terminal, let's say in LA Long Beach tomorrow morning. What many people don't realize is in order for you to go and pick up that container, obviously you need to have an appointment for that particular full container. You also need to bring a particular type of empty container because it's a dual transaction. The ports are clogged, nothing wrong. If you and I were running that operation, we would want to do the same, to say bring in an empty and take in a full. Now, not all empty containers are created equal, even though it may look like that. They belong to different shipping line fleets. So you need to bring a particular type of empty container in order to take that particular full container out. Now, if you got delayed or things changed, the acceptance of that particular empty container may no longer be happening by the time you've actually decided to make your trip. So now you are stuck with a problem where you have the wrong empty, and hence you can't take the full container that you had an appointment for out. And most owner-operators don't have the technological wherewithal to have integrations into port systems. Many people are literally sitting, refreshing port websites to figure out which container is being accepted at that point. And that may still be out of date by the time you actually make it there. So I think that's the type of basic complexity that exists from different stakeholders. And to your point, Craig, can we create a data layer where everybody has equal, transparent access to the real-time information as it's available? Because that then makes sure that that truck driver that wakes up in the morning has the right empty to go and pick up the full container. Now take that one step forward, and which is where I say it's not just a technology solution, because now you're just throwing data into a broken process. Why do you need to have this process work this way? Is there a better way to solve this? Does it need to be a one-to-one appointment matching system, or can we come up with a more pragmatic solution if different fleets, container fleets, port operators can collaborate, and maybe regulators have a role to play here to say it benefits the entire ecosystem if we actually change this operating model to something more efficient where everybody wins.
It makes me curious to know how many street turns are happening in SoCal, because that would obviously be useful as well when people have containers that need to go back, and there's a situation that is an advantage there. So,
Well, not as many as you would think, because you have ocean carriers, no offense, who are monetizing that practice. You'd think that it would be behoove them to encourage that type of behavior. But if there's money to be made, and it's not Maersk, but there's other ocean carriers out there who see an opportunity to make money, they're going to take it. They're going to force you to work in their proprietary system, which costs money, and they're going to force you to pay a per transaction fee. And so where's the motivation for a trucking company who's running on relatively razor thin margins to begin with, because you have all your expenses associated with operating, like a truck, for instance. And we talk about that truck down there, that fully electric truck, that truck out the door costs close to $500,000. And that's not even including the infrastructure that goes along with it. So now we're building up more costs, more costs. We have to pass those costs on to the consumer, to the BCO who passes on to the consumer. So things are just getting more expensive as it goes. And the inefficiencies that are built in, whether it's empty container return restrictions, whether it's particular box rules, as they're called in our side of the table, where you have to use a particular chassis to haul a particular container because that's the deal that was cut with the ocean carrier and the BCO. And the trucker's like, has no visibility into those contracts. And so that's the thing. We can throw as much data in the world at it, but the trucking component, we're still the ones who have to make the appointments. We're trying to compete with thousands of other trucks, 20,000 trucks, 16,000 that are active, for these same amount of appointments. And, you know, you hear this rhetoric, thanks Chris from Port of LA, about 53% of truck gates go unused. Well, that has many different variables that are associated with it. Number one, like volume. If I don't have volume at a particular terminal, or they don't have a ship that's there that they're unloading for offload onto trucks or to trains, they still have appointments. Those appointments are still being counted that aren't being utilized because there's no reason to utilize them. So there's a lot of finger pointing in this industry a lot of the time. We're getting better at it, I think, of trying to take a holistic approach because we're all in the same, swamp together, more or less. But there's these challenges that we try to find better, more efficient ways. And all of a sudden, then we get an addendum through the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement Act that says, oh, wait, hold on. That's going to cost you X amount of dollars to do that now if you want to do that. Or if you want to use this chassis, it's going to cost you this. So we need to go procure our own chassis, which, by the way, have doubled in price since before this pandemic started.
Matt, could you just, for the students, explain what a chassis is and
Sure.
availability?
Nobody knew what a chassis was prior to the supply chain pandemic, right? You have the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times all writing about them now. It's basically, containers. It's like intermodal, more or less. So it comes on a ship, it's offloaded on a ship, put on the ground. Typically the days are long gone of wheeled terminals. So what happens is they get taken off that stack and then pulled back on and put on a piece of metal that has, it's rubber and metal. It's not that sophisticated, but it's literally like the frame of a trailer that the container is put on top of that then hooks into a truck that then is then taken to whatever destination where it's either dropped with the chassis or it's picked off of that chassis and flipped, as we call it, to the ground or to another chassis, or if it's transloaded, all sorts of exciting things. But this chassis is such a critical component. Years ago, the ocean carriers owned the chassis fleet. They would just provide the chassis. They divested for various reasons that I won't get into from our side at this point. But now it's been put on to a couple different situations where you have a pool that's usable by the entire community. You have specialized pools, which are basically run by either lines or terminals. And then you have trucker-owned pools or trucker-owned chassis that we went and procured ourselves. And it's difficult to justify chassis purchases because, again, now we're talking, potentially $35,000 for a chassis that cost like 15, 12 before all of this started, give or take, depending on size, configuration, et cetera. But it's tough to sit on chassis that you're under a 4-year lease on when cargo volumes fluctuate all year long. So you're looking in your yard and you just see a bunch of stacked chassis, or you see a bunch of empty containers sitting on chassis that can't be returned back into marine terminals because of the restrictions that ABS was talking about previously. So it's
Just to
exciting
level
stuff.
set a little bit here.
It's terminal guys.
Well, you also forgot to mention, though, that chassis was one of the first things the Trump era tariffs hit. So most of the chassis used for international containers were all made overseas and most of them in China. And that was actually one of the first things that was hit by the tariffs. And so we had a supply every year coming in to be used and replace, they get damaged, there's accidents. But that stopped, that dried up in 2018, I think it was, 2019.
I don't think that we can, I know I'm not getting political here, but that It was a utilization of the chassis. The pool had 80,000 chassis in it when it started. It right-sized down to 50,000 chassis. It wasn't a supply issue, it was utilization. I had guys who were storing chassis with empty containers, thousands of them, that could not be returned back into marine terminals. You can't return that box back into the marine terminal on a dual transaction, which, by the way, are 43% of total transactions in LA Long Beach are dual transactions. So they're still single transactions. They're triangulated. I had to go drop the empty over here. I got to go over here to pick up this chassis, another different chassis. Then I got to go over here to pick up the box. It's woefully inefficient. So it's utilization. Now, while the Trump tariffs didn't help, if we would have had a more robust approach, which finally what Long Beach did with Pure S, with what LA did with the LAXT yard, which basically created empty container return depots. But the thing is that the ocean carriers have to buy into that, because the ocean carriers, the vessel operators, and the non-vessel operators are the ones who own all those boxes, the Skittles bags of boxes, right? The different color basically means different owner. They are the ones who own the boxes. They are the ones who decide whether or not you can take it to an off-dock return yard. And a lot of times I've had many conversations with my trucking company members about, hey, can I take that to LAXT? Well, we called the line and they're like, no, just take it back to the terminal. Well, I can't because they're not accepting it. Well, not our problem. And then you get 3 months later, you get a per diem bill on the container itself. So, I mean, it didn't help, Chris, but that is not the reason why it was.
Well, it's one of the reasons.
All right,
It was
one
an
of the
improvement.
reasons I'll tell
It was
you.
an improvement because at Maersk, we had $150 million spend on chassis that we couldn't monetize because this was just the way that things were. And when you had a Maersk chassis, you had to go to Maersk terminal, you had to pick up a Maersk box, everything was Maersk, right? Now you have at least you have like an open scope forum where you can go get a chassis in the pool. And you can
DCLI.
drop it, DCLI or Flexi or any of those.
Unless you're in Oakland, where they require you, because there was lines that put in their chassis into the pools, that they still require you to only use a certain type of chassis for a certain type of line. So while I'm hearing you, Craig, and yeah, it opened it up so there's more usage capability, whether it's DCLI, these manufacturers, Direct Chassis Lease Incorporated, and Flexi Van, and Milestone, who's not a part of the pool. And there's only so many American manufacturers. People shifted to Vietnam. They shifted to Mexico for the manufacturing components. So it's not, again, it's utilization. That's the issue. And plus it opens it up when the carriers divested themselves. Then now it became where those box rules that I'm talking about, it's like, you can't use that chassis for that box in this terminal. Well, that's lessened. In Oakland, it is rampant up there right now. So, it depends on where you're at, unfortunately.
All right, we are running out of time, and we knew this was going to be the case. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
My question is, with so many conflicts, I mean, a lot of political and a lot of things, we're already accumulating, right, prior to COVID. And just when COVID hit, I think a lot of unexpected happened. And as a company, or building an ecosystem that opens up open communication, what do you think are the things that are necessary to proceed to have that kind of ecosystem that is more healthy, that is more open for people to know all the information? And also, what do you think are the suggestions that you can make for a new professional to step into this complexity in the industry? Thank you very much.
Well, I know that LA tried very hard to put in something called the Port Optimizer, which was supposed to be full vision into containers, appointments, terminal availability. Unfortunately, in LA Long Beach, they are two different operating ports, and there was some disagreement about the vendor who was running the Port Optimizer. So there's efforts underway. I know Long Beach is looking at what they call the supply chain highway or something to that effect, that really is trying to get this more data into it. For us, there's one critical component missing, and that's the appointment systems. We have 12 different container terminals, 6 different appointment systems, 5 different platforms, where effectively it boils down to 12 different appointment systems that truckers need to work in every single day with 5 screens, surrounded like gamers, hitting refresh all the time, just hoping that you're going to get an appointment. And so when we tell people who are trying to come into the industry, the logistics industry is probably the greatest industry that young people could get into. There's tremendous amount of upward mobility. There's so many different facets within this industry where you can do very well for yourself and learn a lot of interesting things. I guess it's finding what that most interesting component is, right? Because trucking, for better or worse, it's not that sexy of a thing anymore. You know, it's not the old BJ and the Bear, probably dating myself in that too.
Oh, really dating
Yeah,
yourself
that's
there.
right. Or Maximum Overdrive, I don't know, Black Dog.
I don't know about
anybody?
you, but I have no idea what he's talking about.
Sure, Steph.
Any
So-
other questions?
I think on the supply chain side, when you're, as a student right now, there's a need for a lot of money into the system to make sure that we invest properly in the future. And when you're in the supply chain business, and relationships are huge. And being able to collaborate and talk to people and bring things together, then you need cash. So there's two things that you really need to be able to do, and to learn the business and how it works, and then go into the banking or into the infrastructure fund business to invest in it. That's an angle that a lot of people don't think about. They think about inventory management or all these different types of things that you do in 3PLs or within air freight. But on the banking side, there's a huge need. They're bankers, but they don't know our business. It's ridiculous when you talk to them and try to get some understanding of what you're trying to get done and why you need that money to allocate out to projects. If you have that type of people coming up and you have board members and people that understand the business, then I think there's going to be a lot more cash in the system. There's a Brookstones, a Brookfields, there's a Macquarie group that we work for. There's a lot of people that are in there, but there needs to be a lot more understanding of what all the needs are.
Thank you, Craig. The gentleman in the back.
Now, I had more of a comment more than a question, but I'm sure you'd maybe enjoy responding to it. But reverting back to the AB5 conversation, and maybe to the benefit of a lot of the students in the room, a lot of people don't realize how many hundreds of thousands of California employees were affected by AB5, including my organization, which classically has recruiters who are independent contractors who operate under a brand. And my LLC would pay all of them as individuals based on the work that they do. But this affects law firms, real estate firms, the Uber and the Lyft drivers, kind of where it started, truckers. But it's kind of the law of unintended consequences, because I literally had to completely change the structure of my business, and many businesses did. And I think if you don't do that and don't adhere to the law, you could be audited by the California Department of Labor and probably put out of business overnight if you didn't comply. So put that out to the panel.
I'm pretty sure that California wrote the original law of unintended consequences. So yes, exactly. And while there are a bunch of exemptions where lawyers got a little bit of sugar, there was exemptions after 2755, because to say it, the author of the bill she didn't want any amendments. It was only after literally Willie Brown makes a big stink about it, then all of a sudden this bill materializes and you have all these industries that start getting exempted out of it. And for those who weren't, it's painful, because yes, you can be put out of business overnight. And, not to mention the plaintiff's claims on misclassification, but really the only ones who are making money in that are lawyers. So it sounds like what Craig is saying, bankers, not lawyers, is where you guys should be looking at for the future careers.
Thank you, guys. One last question I wanted to ask you all for the students. What would you tell your younger self, knowing what you know today, what would you tell your younger self? Starting with you, Abs.
I'd say, and I think Janice's question kind of points to a little bit of that as well. I would say, find something you're really passionate about that really solves a real pain point. And I think to your question, Janice, there is not just a deep industry, which, logistics supply chain more broadly is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Trucking alone in the US is close to $1 trillion industry. This is a deep enough industry with some very real need for change and improvement. I would say find something that you can really find a lot of passion in yourself for within that, and then just focus on that. And I think the rest will follow.
Thank you. Craig?
I've had so for over 31 years with Maersk, I was in positions for maybe 3, 4 years at a time. If you ever stop learning, you got to move. You have to just pick yourself up, get yourself out of the comfort zone, and try something different. I was in a commercial position for a long time. I went to operations. It was a great move, but I should have done things sooner and quicker because I hate it as a business CEO. It's terrible to have people constantly moving and trying to put them into a place where they can add a lot of value, and that's created over time. But if I just got talking to my younger self, to be truthful, it's important to keep learning, take the opportunities.
Matt?
Those were my answers, so I don't have anything to
So I thought
say.
your intro was don't become a trucker.
No, I was going to say, come to the trucking industry. Come to the trucking industry. I would probably say, don't move to California. I should have stayed in Nevada. No, but seriously, those are great. It's about passion. It's about finding stuff, not being afraid of change. I think that's critical, especially as young people. You guys are on the cusp right now with technology. There's so many amazing things happening. The progress that we're going. There's plenty of industries out there that would take on talent, but the logistics industry itself, don't shy away from it. It might not seem sexy. It's tough work, but again, we need talented, smart people. So don't be afraid of change. Stay passionate, and join the trucking industry. Join the HTA. Actually.
Chris?
So, well, I mean, like I said, these guys have all hit it pretty heavily, what we all feel. I mean, we're sitting here because we love what we're doing. And I think that's the underlying theme. And, what would I have done, 20-something years ago? Actually, it was explained to me pretty early on by somebody when I first started working for a shipping company. The head of our operations told me, she said, the problem is you're going to end up loving this. Every other job in the world is boring. Unfortunately, you're not going to make a fortune. But that's true. I mean, that's the same thing. Everything else is boring. This is exciting. This is interesting. We sit up here and talk because it's interesting. You're not bored sitting there. And I think it's the biggest thing, because it forces you to keep learning. You're doing this because you like it. You want to know what the next deal is. You got to put up with the truckers, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. It's right. But that's the kind of the fun. And again, because we all know each other, we sit and talk, we meet at events like this. That's what's great about it. And that's what I wish I knew as a younger guy. I was like, just make sure you never stop learning. I think it's probably the biggest piece that we can probably take from this. So
Thank you.
You got the answer too.
Yes, thank you so much. I think I would have definitely ventured out of my comfort zone sooner. I did a foreign assignment 10 years ago. I think I wish I would have done it sooner. I applaud you guys for coming from other countries to come to school in America and just take that knowledge back with you, and just showing up is half the battle. Just go for it. And thank you so much for coming today. If you get a chance to check out our electric truck downstairs, say hello to our friends at Performance Team who brought it. Hop in the cab, check it out. It's a super cool vehicle. And thank you so much for joining us today.